A debate has started among members of Congress as to whether or not Donald Trump should or needs to seek congressional approval to do a preemptive strike on North Korea. Now, thankfully, there are Republican members of Congress who are speaking up and saying that congressional approval is absolutely necessary. Senator Dan Sullivan, who's a Republican from Alaska and who sits on the Armed Services Committee and comes from a state North Korea claims is within range of its missiles, said preemptive war on the Korean Peninsula would require authorization of Congress. He continues to say that Article 1 of the US Constitution is very clear about that. We also have another Republican who says, I think it would be to the president's advantage to consult with Congress. It lets North Korea know we mean business. That's Representative Daniel Webster from Florida. Of course, there are Democrats who would definitely prefer congressional approval. Let's hear from one of them. We know that the president is suggesting potential use of military force. This is a conversation that needs to take place. Representative Dan Kildee from Michigan. And so the list goes on. And I'm glad that members of Congress on both sides of the aisle are now speaking up about this, because there is a potential preemptive strike against North Korea based on some of the rhetoric that we've heard from Donald Trump. But I also want to note that even though our law indicates that they're supposed to get congressional approval, there have been lawmakers on the left who have violated that. So in 1973, there was the War Powers Act that essentially gives the president the power to wage war for 60 days before an authorization from Congress is needed. After that, if Congress says no, or if they don't get congressional approval, they have about an additional 30 days to withdraw troops. And Bill Clinton, did the bombing in Kosovo without congressional approval. Also, there was the case involving Barack Obama and his military actions in Libya.
Okay, so usually both parties are enormously hypocritical about this, and depending on who's in office, they'll just say, "Oh yeah, the president has total power." If it's for the president from their party, and if it's not, they'll say, "Oh, the president has no power to do that. It's outrageous." And they'll read the Constitution. So what's the reality? Yeah, so I think that even the War Powers Act of 1973 is unconstitutional, because it clearly says in the Constitution that Congress has to declare war. So now we've made all sorts of nonsense compromises that have nothing to do with what's written in the Constitution. If you're a judicial conservative and you believe in strict interpretation, all of this should be clearly, obviously out of bounds.
And very quickly, remember, after 9/11, Congress essentially allowed presidents to go after terrorism without congressional approval. So that kind of opened the floodgates for more power concentrated in the executive branch.
So I want to get back to that in one quick second, but so dropping a bomb on a country, even if it's not against the government of that country, there is no such exception in the Constitution. There's no exception for drone strikes, signature strikes, only air wars against Libya. There's no exceptions for any of this. And there's certainly not an exception for nuclear war, which is as war gets. So going to Anna's point about the 2001 authorization for the president to act against the global war on terror, which is way too broad. Barbara Lee did a wonderful thing. She's a very progressive member of Congress, and she sits on the powerful House Appropriations Committee, and she suggested that authorization be taken away because it was from 16 years ago and it's too broad. And guess what? It passed the committee, and that's great. That's amazing. And then, of course, Republican leaders came in and killed it and took it out of the bill that they were considering. So that's, again, the Republicans being hypocrites at the leadership level. But to be fair to the Republicans, here, finally, we are beginning to break some partisan ranks. And in this case, it's the Republicans who deserve credit. With a Republican president sitting in office, some of them, not most of them, but some of them are beginning to say, maybe we should go back to what the Constitution says. Obviously, partly because they can see Trump too. They have eyes.
Right. They don't see him as a rational actor. I think that's the reason why they're speaking up, and they realize what's at stake.
Yeah, so they realize how erratic he is, and they're worried that he might actually start a nuclear war, which would be unbelievable. Even Representative Adam Kinzinger, Republican of Illinois, trying to support Trump, had to admit that The words he used against North Korea were, quote, silly words, and that he wouldn't have said them, and he hopes that the president can find a smart way of saying it. Good luck with that approach. And finally, Representative Ted Lieu, Democrat of California, and Ed Markey, Democrat of Massachusetts, who's a senator, wrote companion bills saying that Trump should not have the authority to launch preemptive nuclear attacks before Congress declares war. Now that to me is the most reasonable thing in the world. You shouldn't even have to pass that bill. It's already in the Constitution, but it's great to clarify. And of course the Republicans overall, the majority of them said, hell no. So, well, that now sends a message to Trump, despite some breaking in the ranks. The Republican Congress says, if you want to do preemptive nuclear war, it's still okay by them.
It's crazy.
Help us build independent media. Become a member of the Young Turks. TYTnetwork.com/join.